Good morning, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Friday. It's October 16th. We're getting ready for Parshas Bereishis, and I hope that you're well. I saw something a couple of weeks ago in the news, and it kind of got buried in my stack because of the Yom Tovim. But I got back to it this week as I was looking over Parshas Bereishis, and I was going through the Parsha. I came upon something which made me recall that, oh my gosh, on my desk, I printed something out a couple of weeks ago. It's time to get back to it. Let me first tell you what triggered my memory. Is that all the way at the end of the Parsha, this week it's in the 7th Aliyah, it's in Shvi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah introduces us to Noach's grandfather. Noach's grandfather was a very righteous man by the name of Methushelach. Methushelach, in English he's called Methuselah. Methushelach lived to the ripe old age of 969 years. The pasuk tells us, it's in Perek Hey, pasuk Chav Zayin, Vayu kol yemei Methushelach, Tesha v'shishim shana, u'tisha me'os shana v'yamas. He lived for 969 years. He had a son amongst his children was named Lamech. Lamech was the father of Noach. So Methushelach was the grandfather of Noach, who's going to be the protagonist in next week's Parsha. And but he shows up at the end of this week's Parsha as well. Before Noach shows up, it lets us know who his grandfather, Methushelach, was. Why did seeing the name in the Parsha, Methushelach, why did that jog my memory? So here we go. Just a few weeks ago in September, the New York Times reported an incredible story. However, the story began I started noticing it about 15 years ago with an issue of National Geographic that had come out. And I've been, so to say, tracking this. Every so often I would check in to see what happened with it. And I was amazed to see how just a couple of weeks ago, this story came to fruition. And I mean that literally. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. I have links to this in the email that's up there. In 2005, I spotted an article in a National Geographic magazine that just blew my mind. And this article had the following story in it. Is that a team of scientists in Israel came up with the following idea. It had been reported for years that the date palm, the palm tree that we use to get our lulavim from, the date palm, that's so synonymous with Israel. After all, we always say it's the land flowing with milk and honey, zavas chalavu dvash. What's the dvash? What's that honey? It's not talking about bees' honey. It's talking about that syrup, that honey. We might call it silan, something that comes from dates. That's something that Israel was renowned for. Now, what are those dates? Those were known as Judean dates. They were specific dates that were unique to the land of Israel. And it seems as if those dates are all but extinct. After the Romans destroyed the second Beis HaMikdash, the land of Israel was utterly decimated. Nobody was there to cultivate and take care of those. And it seems as if the Judean dates that were so famous that the Torah extols and calls them, it's the the Eretz Zavas Chalav Dvash, they went all but extinct. What are the dates that we find in Israel? So those were pretty much imported from other regions. Most of them came from Iraq, and some came from Egypt as well. But almost none of the dates, I think none of the dates in the palm trees growing in Israel are the unique dates which were native to Israel, which were known as the Judean dates, Judean palm trees. Those went all but extinct when the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. But here's the article from 2005. A team of scientists, they came upon, when they were excavating Masada in the 1960s, one of the items that they found was the garbage. They found the garbage up in Masada that had been sitting in the Judean hills in that arid conditions in the desert for close to 2,000 years. And in the garbage, they found containers of date seeds, because the inhabitants up at Masada had eaten a lot of dates, incredibly nutritious, and they had spit the seeds into, or the pits, you might say, into these containers, and they were in the garbage. So when the excavations were going on in the 1960s, amongst the items that were discovered and were cataloged and stored away in various warehouses in Israel were these 2,000-year-old pits. So a team of scientists came up with an idea. Let's see, is there still life in those pits that have been sitting dormant for 2,000 years? And they began this long, laborious process wherein they soaked them in different solutions to fertilize them and to, so to say, resuscitate them, bring them back to life, rejuvenate them. And then they planted them. They put them in some very fertile soil. And in 2005, the story was reported that they had initially taken root. that one of them started to take off and grow. This was amazing. It had sat for 2,000 years in the dry conditions up on Masada, but with the right fertilizing techniques, getting them wet, rehydrating them, providing them with some nourishment, they were able to bring life back to those seeds. And amazing. So the first one that really took root, they named it Methuselah, which is English for Mesushelach. Why they call it Mesushelach? Because as we said, Mesushelach is the figure in Tanakh who lived for the longest recorded period of time, 969 years. So here it was that they were welcoming this date palm back to life. They named it Mesushelach, Methuselah. However, they had no idea if it was male or female. It took a couple of years till the date palm grew. It was being carefully guarded at a kibbutz in southern Israel, and finally they realized it was a male. So they said, okay, back to the drawing board. Let's do the same for some of those other seeds. Let's see if we could get a female, because we want to reproduce the original, bring back the original Judean date palm. And it took years, but they finally got a couple of more seeds to take off. It took a couple of years until they realized which ones were the females. And then I saw the story. This blew my mind. This was a New York Times article. And again, I've got it linked in this email, that just in September, they announced that it was a success. They had cultivated a couple of females, the one that they used to take the pollen from Mesushelach, from Methuselah, and rub it on the flowers of this female one. They named her Chana, and they made a shidduch between Mesushelach and Chana, and they actually produced dates, the original Judean dates. They harvested them and they ate them. And here's a whole article writing about it, that they set a shechiyanu on it, they made a bari priya eitz, and they tasted what an original Judean date tasted like. And they're writing that it had some different qualities to it. It was a bit sweeter than some of the other ones. It had different, I'm not such a maven, I don't know if I would notice this, but they noticed that there were dates different than the medjool dates that we're so used to. This was the original Judean date. They brought it back to life. And now they're going to be studied. They want to see, because throughout Sifrei Chazal and in different ancient writings, the date was thought to have an incredible amount of medicinal properties to it. So they want to really study it now that they've brought back this Judean date, to see what qualities does it have and how could it promote healthy living, and absolutely incredible. I think it's a wild story on so many levels, but I want to tell you something that I got out of this that just, it still amazes me. Every single day in our Shemona Esrei, every single day, we say the second bracha of Shemona Esrei, which talks about the Gvuras Hashem, the strength of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in this tefillah, we mentioned 3 times the concept of Mechayeh Mesim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the mysterious power that he's able to bring back the dead, to resuscitate the dead, to resurrect the dead. That's what we say 3 times. And by the way, one of our famous Mefarshim to the Siddur, the Avud Raham, one of our Rishonim, he says, why does it say 3 times? Why do we all recall 3 times in this bracha of Hashem's ability to be Mechayeh Mesim, to revive the dead? It's because there are 3 ways that this manifests itself. The Avud Raham says, there are 3 ways in our world that God resuscitates the dead. Harishona, what's the first one? When a person is asleep, they're considered chashuv kameis. They're considered like they're dead. And yet what happens every morning? God, Baruch Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu enables us to wake up. He returns our soul to us, and we awake. We experience some degree of tchias hamesim in that regard. And then he says, Hasheni, what is the second way that we experience, the world experienced tchias hamesim? He says, Binyan Yeridas Hagisham, when the rains come down, and the rains give the ability for those seeds that have been planted to germinate, to grow, that's a form of tchias hamesim. It takes place before us. Any of us who garden, take part in anything, that should make it manifest. That should make us realize there's this concept of tchias hamesim. Vashlishis, and what's the third one? Binyan tchias hamesim lasud lavo, is that ultimately we believe, and it's a principle of it's a bedrock of Jewish faith, that ultimately in the Yemos HaMashiach, at some point in the Messianic era, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God will revive those who have passed on, and he will resuscitate the dead, bring them back to life. What that will look like, how that'll be, there are so many theories that our Rishonim will describe and write about, but we're waiting to see it eagerly, how that's going to play itself out. What the Avud Raham is telling us is that 3 times in this in this bracha, we say the concept of Mechayim Mesim. We say Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed, Mechayim Mesim B'Rachamim Rabim. That we mention that Hashem brings back the dead. That's referring to when we wake up every morning. And then it says, so again, we're talking about that's a reference to rain, that every time we see things growing, that's a concept of Tchias HaMesim. And then Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayim Mesim, that's ultimately referring to the Messianic era for which we all await so eagerly, when we'll witness the ultimate Mechayim Mesim, resuscitation, the resurrection of all those who have passed on, all of our loved ones. And that's why it's mentioned 3 times in there. So what do I get out of this? Is that reading this article, I've been following it, as I said, for the last 15 years. I've just been amazed by it. And now to see how it played itself out to fruition, exactly, literally. The dates have been grown, they've been harvested, and they've been eaten. This has brought new meaning to me, and it's really reawakened for me. This bracha that we say every single day, 3 times a day of Mechayim Mesim, is that in a certain sense, okay, I know I wake up every morning. Baruch Hashem, thank God we wake up. We kind of take that for granted. Do we really think about that as Tchias HaMesim? And yes, any of us who haven't been involved in any kind of gardening, we plant seeds, we watch them grow, and that's amazing. But do we really think about that as Tchias HaMesim? We take it for granted at this point. But there's one aspect of Tchias HaMesim that none of us could take for granted, and that is the resurrection of the dead, because that's not something any of us have experienced. It's not something the world has experienced. But what brings that concept a little bit closer to me, for me, is reading this story about Methuselah, this date palm that they've resurrected from 2,000-year-old dried up pits that were found in the trash in Masada. They were able, HaKadosh Baruch Hu provided us with the knowledge. The scientists have been able to resurrect them, bring them back to life, and not just have Methuselah grow, but then to bring along Hannah, his Eish Yisrael, you might say, his wife, and that they were able to take the pollen, put it on the flower, and bring about these dates, authentic, original Judean dates, things that haven't existed in this world for 2,000 years. They're back, and they're going to be cultivated. And Israel will once again have the true Judean dates that the Torah writes about. It's Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash. How amazing is that? And when we read that and we see that that came to fruition and that it was possible, in my mind, that lets us say, I know I say the words every single day that there's going ultimately to be Tchias HaMesim, but we don't know what that's going to look like. Come on, how's that going to work? It's never happened. What does that mean? But when we see something like this, it makes it all a little bit more. It gives us a taste. It gives us a flavor. And it makes us say we want more. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we want to see what ultimate Tchias HaMesim is going to look like. And we know it's possible. If you can bring back these Judean dates after 2,000 years, we know that you can bring back all the Mesim, you can bring back all those who have expired, all of our loved ones, all of our ancestors. We know that that's possible too. And as the Rambam formulates in his 13 principles of fundamental Jewish faith, known as the Ani Mamins, that's how we've put them together. The 13th is Ani Mamin B'Emunah Shalema. I believe with complete faith, Shetia Tchias HaMesim, that there will be a resuscitation of the dead. Whenever the wish emanates from the Creator, blessed is His name, and it's exalted, is mentioned forever and for all eternity. It's one of our animamis. It's one of our fundamental principles of belief, and this gives chizuk. This really strengthens it for me when I read this story. And ultimately, this also brings us back to the previous animami. Number 12, the 12th principle of faith is animami b'emunah shalema b'vias hamashiach, that I fully believe with complete faith in the coming of the Mashiach, of the Messiah. Even though he may have delayed, and he is delaying, nevertheless, I anticipate every day that he will come. And with the coming of Mashiach, then we'll be zocha to Tchias HaMesim. May our tefillos be answered. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu respond to all of our heartfelt prayers that we say each and every day. And hopefully reading a story like this will energize our tefillos to take it to another level. Now that we've got a taste of Tchias HaMesim, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu answer our tefillos, answer all of our heartfelt prayers, bring the Mashiach Tzidkenu as soon as possible, and let our world progress to the point where he intends it to be. And ultimately, let us all recognize Tchias and witness Tchias HaMesim, which a story like this brings home the point that, of course, it's possible. We've got a taste of it, but we want so much more. Have a good Shabbos, everyone.